Hi, I'm Jess. We're here aboard the Schooner SoundWaters in Long Island Sound. We use the Schooner, which is an 80-foot sailboat with 3 masts and 4 sails, to explore all over the Sound. Today we're going to be talking all about the benthic organisms, or those organisms that live down at the bottom. We're going to be doing a trawl with our special trawl net we'll talk about in a few minutes, and then we'll go into some of the body systems and different adaptations these animals have to help them survive here. We're going to start our adventure by deploying our trawl net. So our trawl net goes off the back of the schooner, and it drags along the bottom, and it collects all the animals that live down there. This is a little model. You see up here, along the top, we have little floats, represented by these beads. That keeps the mouth of the net floating. And then at the bottom, there's something called the tickle chain. And the tickle chain will bring all the animals that are down at the bottom and scoot them up so they get caught by our net. Then at the very end of our net, we have something called the cod end. And this is where all the animals caught by the net collect, so when we bring them up onto the boat, we can check them out. My friends Captain Vigi and Christina were setting the net up, now ready to deploy it. All right, we had our trawl net out for 10 minutes. Let's see what we caught. First, we caught a ton of comb jellies. We caught 2 small, long fin squids. We caught a spider crab. We caught some baby porgy or scup. We also caught a baby black sea bass. Little black sea bass, and a flounder. All of these animals we caught fit into the food web. You probably know what a food web is, but do you know what it tells us about the ecosystem? My friend Nicola and I will tell you all about it.
Hi, I'm Nicola.
And I'm Jess.
And today we're going to be talking about animal adaptations and their relationship to the food web. We're going to start off inside, and then we're going to take a field trip to the Long Island Sound to see what we can see.
Let's start off with the bigger question. Why do animals need to eat?
Well, animals need to move, right? So in order for an animal to move, it needs energy. And that's where food comes into play.
So we're going to be talking about a food web today, the Long Island Sound food web. A food web tells us how energy moves through an ecosystem. This here is an example of one food web. So a food web is all of the food chains in an ecosystem together. They're kind of combined, and all of the animals are in different categories based on where they fit into the food web. These categories are called trophic levels. There are a bunch of different ones, but generally they're broken down into decomposers, producers, and consumers.
And all of those animals that are in those trophic levels have special adaptations for that level. So that food web that we just saw looked really complicated, but we're going to break it down by trophic levels for you to give you a better understanding.
So we're going to start off with our food web at the producer level. So producers are animals that use the sun energy, the sun's light, to create their own food. So if you think about outside, that's all the plants and the grass and things like that. They're also called autotrophs. So using the sun's energy through photosynthesis and with the nutrients, they're able to create all of the energy in our ecosystem. So they're very, very important. And our producers are eaten by our primary consumers. So our primary consumers are all herbivores. That means that they eat plants. So they have special adaptations inside their body that allow them to break down all that plant matter and release the energy into themselves. Our primary consumers are all eaten by our secondary consumers. And our secondary consumers are carnivores then, because they eat other animals. So instead of getting all of their energy directly from the producers, they get it from the primary consumers. So they're eating other animals.
From our secondary consumers, we move on to our tertiary consumers. Now our tertiary consumers, tertiary is a big word, but it means 3. So these are our third type of consumers. And these are going to eat the secondary consumers. These are really important. These are things like our bigger fish in the water that are going to eat all those smaller fish. So again, they're not getting their energy from producers, but the producer's energy is moving through the system to our tertiary consumers. From there, we move on to our apex predator. Now, our apex predator is usually our larger animal, and those animals are going to eat everything basically in this food chain. They can eat our tertiary consumers, they can eat secondary consumers, and even primary consumers. And these, a great example of that, are humans. We eat pretty much everything in our ecosystem, all these different organisms. So, we have our apex predator. Where does it go from there? It has to break down somehow. That's when our decomposers come in. So our decomposers are going to take any of these different levels and it's going to break them down into nutrients that can then be used by our producers again. So we're going to have arrows going to our decomposers. These guys are essentially recycling everything that those animals were into something that's useful again. And then our producers, like I said, are going to be using all of those nutrients to provide even more energy to keep the cycle going.
One thing we always talk about with the food web is how much biomass there is. So if we think about how many producers there are in our ecosystem versus how many apex predators there are always more of the producers than there are apex predators. So we say there is more biomass for those animals and there is less biomass for the apex predators. So in a healthy ecosystem, there are always more producers than there are primary consumers, and so on up the trophic levels as you get all the way up to the top.
And this is really important because while you might not think that things at the bottom of the food chain or our food web are important things, they're actually the most important because there's the most of them.
Now that we've learned all about the Long Island Sound food web, let's go out and take a field trip, see what we can find. I'm standing here on the shoreline of Long Island Sound at the SoundWaters Coastal Education Center in Cove Island Park in Stamford, Connecticut. We're going to start off at the bottom of our food web. Now, if you look at these two waters, this one's clear and this one is kind of green. Do you know why it's green? It's actually green because there's little tiny plants in it. So those are called phytoplankton. Phytoplankton are just like the plants on the land. They use the sunlight through photosynthesis to create their food. If we were to zoom in on that green water, this is what we would see. These are photos of some of the phytoplankton we find in Long Island Sound. They're all different shapes and sizes, but they do the same thing. They have special chlorophyll inside the chloroplasts inside their cells that they use to create the food that they make through the sunlight and the nutrients from the water.
Moving up a trophic level, we have our herbivores. Now, these don't look like animals that eat grass like a cow, but they're going to eat our phytoplankton. These are called bivalves. These animals live in the intertidal zone. This zone has water some of the time and then no water some of the time. So they are specially adapted to eat in those environments. They have two hard shells. That's why they're called bivalves. Bi is a scientific word for two, and valve is a scientific word for shell. Bivalve, two shells. So, at high tide, these guys are constantly eating the phytoplankton. The way that they do this is through two different siphons. One siphon is called the in-current siphon. This siphon sucks in water and it has little tiny cilia in its gills inside these two shells in its body that help take out the phytoplankton from the water. That clean water is then expelled through the excurrent siphon. The excurrent siphon releases all that water back into the environment. The really cool thing about these guys is that they are able to clean the water as they eat. Some bivalves, like our oyster, are very efficient filter feeders. They can filter up to 1.3 gallons of water per hour. That equals about 30 of these per day. That's a super filter.
The next animal on our food web we're going to talk about is the sea star. The sea star is a little bit different than the bivalves because they're a carnivore. Bivalves were herbivores, so they just ate the plants. These guys will eat other animals. They have a bunch of adaptations that help them do that. So they actually don't have any bones or any blood inside their body. They use a water vascular system instead. And this little orange dot right here, it's called a madrepore, and they suck in water through that. They use that water inside their body to move all the little suction cups, the tube feet they're called, that they have on the bottom of their rays. With those suction cup tube feet, they can stick to their prey, which is the bivalve. And what they do is they sit on here and they wait until the bivalve opens. Then they hold the shells open with their suction cups, and their really cool adaptation starts. They have something called external digestion. So that means that they digest their food outside of their body. We have internal digestion, so all of our digestion takes place inside. And what they actually do is they spit their stomach outside their body into the clam or into the bivalve, and they digest it in there. And then they pull everything back inside with their stomach. And by doing that, allows them to eat an animal that is much larger than could fit inside this sea star, like this clam.
Another animal on our food web that often gets overlooked are our decomposers. These right here are mud snails. Their job is essentially to recycle everything that's in the Long Island Sound. That means dead things, debris that other animals leave behind, and waste. Imagine if you didn't ever get rid of any of your recycling or your trash in your house. Things would get pretty messy. But without decomposers in the Long Island Sound, the Long Island Sound would be messy too.
The Long Island Sound food chain contains so many different animals. All the producers, consumers, and decomposers. What do you think would happen if we removed one of those levels from our food chain?
Take the sea star, for example. We already talked about it. Do you remember what it ate? It ate those bivalves, so clams, mussels, and oysters. If you look around me, we have shells scattered everywhere right now. These are clam shells. Now, there's one predator that also likes to eat clams, and that's the seagull. They dive deep down, bring them up, drop them onto a dock, and then they eat what's inside. Why do you think this might be a problem? Well, it could be a problem because if they eat all of the bivalves, these sea stars are so used to eating bivalves that they would have no food left, and so the sea stars might not survive. The other thing that would happen is that we would have a surplus of our phytoplankton. There would be so much phytoplankton because it's not being balanced out by its predators.
The Long Island Sound food chain is a balancing act. Predators keep the prey population in check, and prey can only sustain a certain number of predators. If one thing is removed, or something is harmed by a disease or by pollution, it can have a huge effect on the whole Long Island Sound food chain. It's so important to make sure you protect all the small animals and the large animals.
So thanks for joining us today. Today we learned about different types of consumers, we learned about decomposers, and we learned all about the food chain.
Now that we've met some Long Island Sound animals and learned about what they eat, I wonder how they digest their food. Do you think sea stars and flounder do it the same way? Here's a video of my friend Nicole and I talking all about it. Living is hard and requires a lot of energy. Organisms get their energy in a bunch of different ways. If you think about trees or grass, they make their own energy from the sun's light. Can animals do that? Nope. Animals like us need to eat. When we eat, all of our food comes into our body and gets broken down into smaller pieces that our body can use. And that's done by our digestive system. Do you think all animals digest their food in the same ways? Nope. If you think about what you had for lunch, I know I had peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Now, the way I digest this is going to be a little bit different than how a goose would digest his lunch. He probably didn't have peanut butter and jelly. Probably had a nice salad of some grass. So this grass will be digested a little bit differently than my body will digest my peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So what we're going to do today is dive into some of the systems in the organisms we find in Long Island Sound.
Fish have a digestive system pretty similar to ours, and their digestion starts as soon as something enters their mouth. So something enters their mouth, and then it travels through their esophagus. And from their esophagus, it travels through to their stomach, where it's broken down and all of those nutrients are absorbed. The stuff in their stomachs is actually liquid. Then what happens is it travels through a series of ducts that release enzymes to further break down that material until it hits their intestine. And the intestine in different fish depends on what they eat. A fish that's a carnivore or predator is going to eat meat, and it's going to have a shorter intestine than an animal or fish that eats plant material or is an herbivore. And this is because it takes a lot longer and it takes a lot more energy to break down the fibrous plant material than it does the meat. Then, once the food passes through the intestine, it's excreted as waste.
We're going to talk about some differences between a flounder and a striped bass. So flounder are those animals that are flatfish we find down the bottom of Long Island Sound. Striped bass we find swimming through the water column. One major difference they have is the way that their mouth is shaped and the way that their teeth are. So a flounder has teeth similar to this. So they're sharp and pointy, and they use them to tear things apart and to bite apart their prey. Now, striped bass also eat things that need to be torn apart, but they eat them a little bit differently. They actually have tooth patches inside of their mouth. So they swallow their prey whole, and these tooth patches help them grip the prey so it can't get back out again. They also have special things on their gills that make the prey go down head first. If they didn't go down head first, there'd be some troubles for the striped bass. Another difference is the way that they get their food. So flounder, when they lay down on the bottom of the sound, they're really great at camouflaging, so they can't even be seen. And what they do is they ambush their prey. So they hide. When they see something delicious swim by, they jump up, grab it, and then they go back down and hide again. The striped bass are super fast and very powerful swimmers. So instead, they actually chase down their prey, and they really like to gorge themselves. So what they do is they find something they really like, and they eat a ton of it. Then they go and kind of sit down at the bottom and let it all digest. So they have two different ways of eating as well. Another difference between striped bass and flounder is what they eat at different points in their life cycle. So striped bass actually breed in freshwater. So they come out of the saltwater in the ocean where they live for the majority of their adult life, and they go up into streams where to have their young to spawn. And when they do that, when the babies are born, they eat very different things than the adults do. So they'll eat like insect larvae and stuff like that. And then as they grow and come out, they'll eat things on the bottom, and eventually they'll start to eat fish. Now flounder are a little bit different. They're born right where they live all the time, and they, when they are born, eat plankton. Then they'll eat little fish. But once they get to be about 6 inches long, they eat the same thing for the rest of their lives. They don't start to eat bigger things as they grow. They just eat more small things. It's kind of weird. Another difference is how much they need to eat. So a predatory fish needs to eat at least 1% of its body weight to live. If it eats 2 to 3% in order to grow. Now flounder, there's been special research done that shows they need to eat 4 to 8% of their body weight every day. It's a lot of food.
Now let's compare the digestive systems of two related animals. So here we have a brittle star and a sea star. You're probably familiar with the sea star, so we're going to start off with that one first. Now, you may think because it has a pretty simple body that its digestive system is pretty simple too, but that's not the case. This guy actually has two different stomachs. One of them is called the cardiac stomach and the other one is the pyloric stomach. Now, the digestion begins as soon as it gets hungry and it sticks out this cardiac stomach, and it almost looks like a little bubble of bubble gum. So it sticks out its cardiac stomach into its food. And sea stars are really cool because they're able to eat things that are much bigger than they are, like this clam here. So it sticks out its cardiac stomach into the clam, and it starts digestion right inside this animal itself. Then what happens is it pulls that food from the clam back into its body and into the pyloric stomach, where it's broken down further and actually distributed throughout the arms of the sea star, where it's then digested by digestive glands located in the arms. Once it's done doing that, it's excreted as waste again. Let's move on to the brittle star. Now, both the sea star and the brittle star have mouths located on the underside of their body, but the main difference is that brittle stars only have one stomach where the sea star has two. They actually have 5 teeth that help scrape things off of the bottom of the Long Island Sound. And this is because brittle stars don't eat clams like our sea star does. They actually eat dead things on the bottom of the seafloor. Now, the brittle star has one stomach that has a bunch of pouches in it. And these pouches help digest things because it's not able to push the food that it's eating out to its arms like the sea star is. It has to keep all of the food centrally located in its body so that it can digest it there. And then, unlike the sea star that's able to excrete its food as poop, it actually has to throw up the waste. Today we talked all about the digestive system and compared digestion between flounder, striped bass, brittle stars, and sea stars.
Even though these animals are all so closely related to each other, they've developed different features that allow them to sufficiently break down their food. No matter how an animal does it, all animals rely on food for their energy. There are so many adaptations that animals have developed to help them digest their food in the most efficient way possible, like those different tooth patterns and intestine lengths of the fish. After an animal digests all its food, there are a ton of nutrients in its body. Do you know how they move them around? It's by their vascular system. Nicole and I did some research into vascular systems that we want to share with you. Whew. Every time I go for a run, I really appreciate my vascular system. Do you know why? Without it, I wouldn't be able to move. My vascular system is what distributes all the nutrients and gases all around my body that my cells need. And when I'm running, I'm breathing a lot harder and a lot faster than I would be when I'm standing still. It's because all of my cells are using the oxygen in my body, and they need to be replenished, so that's why you breathe a lot faster. Now, not all vascular systems look the same. Today we're going to be diving into cardiovascular systems and hemosystems.
Some animals have a cardiovascular system. Let's break this word down a little bit. Cardio means heart, and vascular means some sort of vessel for blood to flow through. So cardiovascular system has that heart and it pumps constantly, and its job is to push and pull blood all throughout your body.
We all know that blood is that important red stuff inside our body that carries around all the nutrients and oxygen we need. Blood is actually made up of two different things, plasma and blood cells. Plasma is pretty much water, and blood cells are three different kinds. The first kind are red blood cells, and they're the reason that our blood is red. When they come into contact with oxygen, they have something called iron inside them that binds to it. And when iron comes into contact with oxygen, it turns red. Kind of like on the rust you can see here. It's kind of reddish in color. And they carry the oxygen all over our body that we need. They also take away some of the waste products too. Another kind of blood cell we have are white blood cells. White blood cells are kind of like the security guards of our body. And what they do is they defend us against illness. So they'll attack different viruses and things that get inside of our bodies to make sure that we stay nice and safe and healthy. And we also have something called platelets. Platelets are kind of like handymen. So what they do is if you get a cut, you don't keep bleeding, right? Your cut clots. And that's the platelets. What they do is they repair, they bind together, and they fix us so that we don't just keep bleeding. But those platelets can't detect bacteria that could get into our cuts. There is an animal that has blood that can do that, though.
Horseshoe crabs have really unique blood, and their blood is blue. This is because instead of iron like we have in our red blood cells, they have copper, and copper, in the presence of oxygen, turns blue. So they're true blue bloods. Now, we have three different types of blood cells in our body. We have those red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, but the horseshoe crab only has one blood cell in its body, and it's called an amoebocyte. And the amoebocyte is really good at doing something. It's really good at detecting viruses and infections inside the blood of the horseshoe crab. And the way it does this is it clots around the foreign body or the invader, just like milk kind of curdles. So we're gonna take a look and see what that looks like. So this green vial here has our seawater in it. And our seawater has something that could hurt the horseshoe crab. Let's say it's a bacteria. And this is our horseshoe crab blood. Now, if we put some of the seawater into our horseshoe crab blood, what do you think is going to happen? We're going to find out. So as we drop the seawater into the vial of horseshoe crab blood, we can see this kind of milky layer appears on the top of the blood. This is that clotting factor. And this happens within the horseshoe crab's body 24/7, which makes them really good at surviving. Now, this is just a chemical representation of what would happen inside a horseshoe crab. This is actually just water mixed with a chemical. Same thing with the seawater.
We can think about our cardiovascular system kind of like a figure eight. It all starts off with the heart. The heart will pump blood to the lungs to get oxygen, and then from the lungs, it will go back to the heart. That's the pulmonary circuit of our cardiovascular system. Then from there, the blood that does have oxygen in it gets pumped to the body, and then from there, it goes back to the heart again to get reoxygenated. And that's the systemic system. So those two work together to make sure our body gets everything that it needs. Now, some organisms only have one systemic system, like fish. They have gills, and they just have one circuit that takes the blood from the gills with oxygen to the body and then back again.
Some animals have an open circulatory system, like this horseshoe crab. The horseshoe crab doesn't have any blood vessels per se, like those arteries and veins we just talked about, to carry blood. Instead, it's moving around freely within its body cavity. This body cavity is known as a coelom, and its organs are able to get what they need from the blood itself instead of needing to be delivered by tubes. This saves the animal a lot of energy in the long run.
We just talked about the cardiovascular systems that a lot of animals have, where they have a heart. Now, this guy doesn't have a heart or blood. He has something called a hemosystem. So this is a sea star. And inside of his body, instead of using blood, he actually uses a different fluid. And he uses a lot of water also. So he has an orange dot on here called a madreporate. And that's where he sucks all of the water in. Inside of his body, in the middle, called the coelom, he uses that water mixed with the special fluid he has, and he uses it to power his body, He moves it all around through special canals down each arm, and he moves nutrients and gases. He actually powers little suction cups on the bottom of his arms. So instead of having blood, he uses that water instead.
So how is it possible for a sea star to propel its little tube feet to move with only water? It all has to do with water pressure. So if we take this syringe here, this is going to act as our madreporate. So it's going to be pushing water through our sea star system. And this syringe over here is going to act like the tube feet. Let's see what happens when I push water through to the tube feet. We can see that it's already moving. And it can move these in and out using that water pressure.
Today we learned about vascular systems, the cardiovascular system and the hemosystem, and how they help to distribute gases and nutrients throughout an animal's body.
These delivery systems are really important to keeping animals alive and healthy.
There are so many parts to an animal's body that helps it move around nutrients and oxygen. Some animals have that cardiovascular system that uses a heart and blood vessels like us, and those other animals have a hemosystem that just uses fluids and water pressure. How do you think animals move around in the Long Island Sound? Let's go learn about it from my friends Tim and Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina.
Hi, I'm Tim.
We're going to learn all about the adaptation aquatic locomotion today and then take a field trip out to the Long Island Sound. Aquatic locomotion is a very important adaptation. Tons of animals use it for predator-prey relationships, migration, courtship. Today we're going to learn about it in two different ways. Vertebrates, which are animals with a backbone, and invertebrates, animals without a backbone. Examples of vertebrates are going to be bony fish and reptilia, and our invertebrate examples are going to be mollusca and decapoda.
So it's important that we group animals by shared traits. This is going to be one of our tools when we're looking at the aquatic locomotion of different animals. So the first group we're going to start with is Decapoda. Something common to all of our decapod animals is that they have 10 legs. Decapoda literally translates to mean 10 feet. So every one of these animals is going to have 5 pairs of legs. With the blue crab, we can see the back leg is actually a swimmerette, we call it, and it's kind of like a paddle. This allows them to move sideways and swim in the water. Our next group is mollusca. So these are our mollusks. This group is going to include any animal pretty much with a calcium shell. This includes the mussel. So mussels have 2 shells, but something common to all of our mollusks is that they have a muscular foot. With a mussel, they can't move very far, but the muscular foot allows them to drag themselves a little bit and make very small movements. Another example of a mollusk is going to be our snails, which we'll learn about later. Our next group here is reptilia. Reptilias are reptiles. There's a lot of different ways of aquatic locomotion among our reptiles. Right here we have an alligator. If you think about an alligator out of the water, they're very clumsy, their legs don't really support them that well, but they have this nice big tail that allows them to swim really quickly in the water. Our last group here is going to be our bony fish. So again, with fish, we have a ton of different ways of moving. This is going to depend highly on their lifestyle, the things that they're eating, where they live in the water, and how far they have to move. So we're going to go through the flounder, the oyster toadfish, and the sea robin, and see how these animals actually walk around or move in the water.
Here we have the flounder. There are 4 types of flounder that are native to the Long Island Sound, and they all move in the same way. When they first are born, they swim just like every other fish, but when they turn 1, their body rotates and they go flat, and their eye travels to the other side of their face. Pretty crazy. When you see them, you can notice their pectoral fins and they have a tail. They're really good at moving those fins to spread sand over their body to hide from predators or to hide from prey. Next, we have the sea robin. The sea robin's really different from the rest of the fish here because they have a pectoral fin that you'll see moves on the bottom, and they are really sensitive and they can manipulate different objects on the bottom of the Long Island Sound. Next, we have the oyster toadfish. If you look at their body, you can tell that they're not the best swimmers. They have a really large head, tiny fins on the side, and a long tail. They are mostly a lie-in-wait predator. Now that we learned all about the adaptation aquatic locomotion, let's head outside to see some examples by the Long Island Sound.
So we're here at SoundWaters Coastal Education Center, Cove Island Park, Stamford, Connecticut, and I'm here with my friend the Diamondback Terrapin. We're standing in the salt marsh, which is where they like to hang out when they're on land. This is one of our cool native species to Long Island Sound. We're going to be focusing on their movement. So you can see this one here is trying to swim while I have it in the air. Not only are they incredibly good swimmers because of their awesome webbed feet, they're also really good on land. So this is a turtle that spends some of its time on land, some of its time in the water. If we go back and think about a sea turtle, unlike these guys, their front legs are actually flippers. With the Diamondback Terrapin, we kind of have a combo of a foot and a flipper, right? That's what webbed feet are for. So the turtle that's adapted to be able to do both things. We also know it's not entirely a land animal because unlike its tortoise friends who do not have webbed feet, this animal does.
Hi, I'm at a tidal pool here on the shores of Long Island Sound. Tidal pools are formed when the high tide comes in. Water gets trapped when the low tide starts going out. Here we have a spider crab and a lobster. Let's take a closer look at these. Here we have our lobster. These decapods have 10 legs, hence the name decapod. They have 4 legs on each side, called their walking legs, and 2 large claws. They also have this really awesome tail, which is classified as an abdomen. They flex the muscles in their abdomen and pull their tail in close to help them move backwards. This propulsion of the backward swimming helps them to escape predators or even find prey. Here we have our spider crab, which is also classified as a decapod, 10 legs. They have 4 legs on each side, called their thoracic legs. This physiological adaptation helps them by them digging their thoracic legs into the sand and moving sideways. It helps because then their legs don't trip over each other. These crabs are the only type of crab that can also move forwards and backwards.
We're here at the Rocky Intertidal Zone where we're going to find 2 animals belonging to the mollusca phylum. This is a quahog. They're a species of clam that live here on Long Island Sound. They belong to the phylum Mollusca, like our mussel did inside, and they have 2 shells, which belongs to our Bivalvia class. They have a muscular foot that's common to all the mollusks, but unlike some other mollusks, they can't move much. They're pretty much stuck to going vertically up and down in their holes. Here's the eastern mud snail, one of our local univalves. Like all of our mollusks, they have a muscular foot. But unlike our quahog, a univalve is able to move a lot more. So our quahog is stuck going up and down in its hole, whereas our univalves can actually move around quite a bit. The eastern mud snail is uniquely adapted in that it has a mucus raft. Why do you think they have a mucus raft? Well, what it does is make it nice and slippery for them to be able to move around. Currents and tides take them away if they need to have better access to resources. Their mucus raft also attracts bacteria. They actually then turn around and eat that same bacteria on their mucus raft. So today we learned about aquatic locomotion in several different groups. Our 2 main groups were our vertebrates, those animals with backbones, and our invertebrates, those animals without backbones. Among our vertebrates we had the bony fish, we had reptiles, which included our Diamondback Terrapin. With our invertebrates we had our decapods, such as our lobster, our spider crab, and then we also had our mollusks, which included our bivalves and our univalves.
Being able to move through the water column is crucial for marine organisms. They need to be able to find their food, and they also need to be able to get away from predators. How do you think they can tell where they're going? Do all animals view the world in the same way and have the same senses? Tim and Christina know all about the animal senses, so let's go hear from them.
So animal senses are crucial. There's a ton of different adaptations, a lot of different ways that animals use their senses in order to survive. We're going to go through the 4 different kinds: auditory receptors, mechanoreceptors, photoreceptor, and chemoreceptor. Big fancy words, but we're going to break them down for you. They're all different ways for animals to survive. So they rely on these things for migration, for finding prey, for avoiding predators, for finding mates. It goes on and on. The first one we have is auditory receptors. So the moth here has some of the best hearing in the world. Why would a moth have really good hearing? If you think about their predators, it's the bat. We know that bats use echolocation, so bouncing sound, to find where their food is. If you're a moth, you need to be able to hear those sounds. So moths have such good hearing that they can actually hear better than a bat does, and that helps them to avoid getting eaten by a bat.
Next up, we have chemoreceptors, which a shark is the best example. They're one of the most effective predators because they can sense their prey for a mile away by just 1 drop of blood with their nose here. They have 2 nostrils, kind of like a human, where the water comes in the left and out the right, and they could determine from that the direction of the prey, which is pretty amazing. They also have these tiny little freckles called ampullae of Lorenzini. They're an electroreceptor where they can literally feel the muscle movement of their prey in the and go in that direction to hunt them. Next up, we have the mechanoreceptor, which is a great example is the manatee. The manatee has tiny little hair cells all over their body. They live in murky water, so they adapt to that by these tiny little hairs being able to feel their surroundings. And with just those tiny hairs, they can make out the size or the shape of the object. It's pretty amazing.
The last one we have is the Manta Shrimp. What you can see here is that their photoreceptors, in other words, their eyes, are extremely well adapted. Their eyes look nothing like our own, or what we call compound eyes. So they're going to see multiples of the same image. But these guys have such good eyesight. Humans only have 3 photoreceptor cell types, and they have anywhere from 12 to 16 depending on the species. They rely very heavily on their eyes in order to have good depth perception to snatch their prey. So this is crucial for them in order to survive. I have 2 great Long Island Sound native fish here that are going to be fantastic examples of some animal senses. So the first is the sea robin. The sea robin has these little, what we call ray-like projections coming off around their throat, and at times it appears like they're walking. These aren't actually really used for walking, but their main function is kind of a combo of a mechanoreceptor and a chemoreceptor. So they use these to kind of feel over the sand to find things like worms, clams, other small invertebrates, and they can not only feel them with the actual projections, but they can also kind of sense them through their chemoreceptors at the end of the rays. The other one we have here is the northern kingfish. So kind of similar to the sea robin, but a little less adapted, a little less advanced. So they have what we call a barbel underneath the chin here. And it does the same thing as a sea robin's rays, where it's going to feel around on the bottom for their food. And it's a combo of both a mechanoreceptor and a chemoreceptor. So this helps both these fish to be super well adapted and ultimately to survive in the Long Island Sound.
Now that we learned about animal senses inside, let's head outside to the Long Island Sound and go seining and see some examples.
We're here at SoundWaters Coastal Education Center, Cove Island Park, Stamford, Connecticut, and behind me is Holly Pond. In front of me is a seine net. This is a net commonly used in population studies by scientists. What we're going to do today is we're going to use it to find some of our local animals and see what kind of different senses that they use in our environment.
We caught a lot of cool things here in our seine net, one being the silverside. The silverside gets his name because he has this silver stripe on the side. This silver stripe is also important because it's their lateral line. The lateral line is made up of tiny little mechanoreceptors, which help this fish sense water pressure, if prey is nearby. It also helps them to school. So a school is a group of fish that stay together. This also helps them escape the predators.
This is the horseshoe crab. The horseshoe crab has been on the planet for 450 million years, which means they are expertly adapted to their environment. The most obvious sense mechanism they have on them is their eyes, so photoreception. The easiest ones to see are their 2 compound eyes. These eyes are similar to how our eyes see, but they see multiples of the same image. They also have 8 sensory eyes. Sensory eyes don't see as well as a compound eye. They really only see shapes and shadows. They're easy to find right here on the front of the crab. This means they have a total of 10 eyes to paint a full picture of what's going on around them. They also have some mechanoreceptors. We can see these fine little bristle hairs on different spots on their body that allow them to feel things around them. They also have 2 fantastic chemoreceptors. The first of which is near their mouth, which allows them to taste things, fine little hairs, and the other is called the flabellum. The flabellum is down here on the crab, and it actually allows them to taste the quality of the water to make sure they're not in any water that's unsafe or polluted for them.
Sea stars are driven by their chemoreceptors. These chemoreceptors will sense a prey nearby, such as a clam, and the sea star will slowly start inching towards it, only at 6 inches per minute. Pretty slow. They also have photoreceptors in each of their 5 eyes. Their photoreceptors only see light and dark, so the shadows. It helps them to know their location. Also in their body are mechanoreceptors. These only help with gravity and rheotaxis, so the sea star will actually move its body in the direction of the current so it doesn't get swept away.
This is the channeled whelk. The channeled whelk is a large carnivorous snail that actually eats our bivalves like our clams, oysters, mussels, etc. So those aren't animals that move, but this animal does need to find where they are. They rely really heavily on chemoreception. So what they do is they wait for water to come in through their gills, and they use sensory organs to actually taste the water, and that helps them to orient towards their prey. So today we learned all about animal senses. These are crucial to an animal's survival, and they all have unique adaptations that allow them to eat their food, stay away from predators, and migrate to where they need to be. Animals rely on photoreception, so how they see, chemoreception, which involves taste and smell, auditory reception to hear, and mechanoreception to feel.
Each of the animals we collected in our trawl today plays a special role in the Long Island Sound ecosystem. They all have a place in the food web, where some animals rely on them as prey, and others rely on them as predators to maintain population size. They have specialized body systems that digest their food and also transport nutrients around their body. And they've adapted special ways to move around the water and to sense their environment around them. With all these adaptations, these animals are able to survive and thrive in the Long Island Sound. Thanks for coming aboard the Schooner SoundWaters. I had so much fun exploring the Long Island Sound with you. Hope to see you again soon on another SoundWaters virtual field trip.